last and by very much not least, we have our final speaker of the evening. I've got to say, that Casey is going to be. I mean, we're a multidisciplined event, right? That was the whole point of it. Casey seems to be, in terms of a great fit, probably one of the most multidisciplined people I think I've seen in the region by miles. We did the obvious thing in our tweets and everything and said, okay, it's the Birmingham Poet Laureate. I didn't actually know there was a Birmingham Poet Laureate, so it was like a sort of a Today I Learned type thing. And if you look at the history of both the Poet Laureates here, they're obviously sort of like big names. So in Casey's the current one, but when you look at what he does, he's far more than that. So as an educator, he's an assistant head teacher where he specialises in behaviour, in behaviour and inclusion, levelling up on sort of social and cultural levels of levelling up pupils, safeguarding, and he's got an array of qualifications from University of Worcester, I think an honorary degree from the University of Worcester, but also Birmingham City University, and also a degree from both. He's doing a master's at the moment, I think, or just completed. I think I'm sure he'll correct me in a minute. With the poetry that he does, also he's had a string of singles and an EP. Obviously, like the sort of the underground community in Birmingham is kind of like again is like a Brum Tapas thing, but it's not spoken about too much. I mean, yeah, we've got superstars like Lady Lucia and JK and people like that, but really sort of under the surface, there's a lot of names and events and cool stuff going on. So naturally, Casey's got an EP that sort of goes hand in hand with that, with the poetry that he does. So he's just had his second collection of poetry published on Burning Eye Books, which is titled "Please Do Not Touch." So we're going to hear some excerpts and then do a Q&A afterwards. Everybody, for our last speaker of the evening, please welcome Casey Bailey.
Hey guys, I hope you can all see me. I'm sharing my screen, so I don't know what you can see, if that makes any sense.
You can all see, mate.
Cool. Thank you for the intro. That was big. Okay, so my next collection, my second collection of poetry, as James said, will be published really soon with Burning Eye Books. It will be published on the 3rd of June. And what I'm going to try to do, it's a rare opportunity really to have this kind of time to go through something, talk about it, share some of the poems. So I'm going to kind of talk you through the process, how I got to the book as it is now, and yeah, then hopefully answer some questions. So I'm probably going to share some poetry and some information for about 20-25 minutes. So cool. So the book is called Please Do Not Touch. And what you can see on the left side of my slide is the front cover. The front cover was designed by my wife, and the handprint is my son's handprint. And I just think that's cool. That's why I told you that. The concept for the book started in going around like museums, National Trust houses. You often see these signs saying, please do not touch. And almost always where you see these things, they're on items that have been taken from somewhere else in the world. So you've got something that if it was never touched in the first place, would never have made it to this museum or this National Trust house or this English heritage site. And for me, I found that like very hypocritical. And I went down this little wormhole in my head. And I focused specifically on the National Trust for a long time. Just looking at this kind of hypocrisy and how a lot of the wealth that we see, whether it's the wealth that's displayed from times gone by or even the wealth in modern society, is like somehow come from, whether it's the slave trade, colonialism, all different kind of like dodgy means, as I will put it. And so thankfully, when I put the book together and I put the concept together, I submitted it to Burning Eye Books and they said they will publish it. I'm very proud of that. It's a great publishing house, and here we go. So the first poem in the book is called The Ruin. And if you've ever been to Shugborough Estate, you probably would have seen The Ruin. It's a National Trust house, and The Ruin is this monument in the garden. And this poem is about The Ruin. The monument in the garden isn't falling down. It was built like that. The architect admired the aesthetic of ancient Athens, dilapidated statues leaning like old men on canes before hip replacements. Struggle and pain are so romantic and sexy to those who have never known them. In a world where the Rottweilers gnaw off their own tails to wag their stumps for sympathy and rhinoceroses shed their horns for attention, the ruin fits. With the sunlight splintering off the river, giving light back to a structure that only throws shade, and dragonflies jiving across its dance floor, it is wondrous and elegant and magical, and I wish I never knew its story. Cool, thank you. So, yeah, the ruin was made like that. It was made to look like a ruin, which is very weird. Anyway, so Shugborough Estate is, or was, the home to the Anson brothers, Thomas Anson and George Anson. And during writing this book, I did lots of research on different houses, different people. And the Ansons are two that I found very interesting, particularly George Anson, because George Anson kind of epitomizes what was going on in my head when I was writing this book. Because George Anson was like a naval captain. He sailed around the world, taking people's stuff. If he wasn't British, they would call him a pirate. But because he's British, he's a naval captain, he gets to bring all this money home. He gets to hold up boats and take their stuff and bring them home, and he becomes a hero. And there's an irony in the fact that today we have people who are rich because their ancestors were people like the Ansons who judge people who go out and steal and take to become rich. And I wonder if they know where their wealth comes from. And I think the epitome of this is there's a book that I wanted to read, which was written by George Anson. It was his notes of his travels around the world. And when I bought this book, this is how it looked inside. It's all like photocopied pages. And that like was the best metaphor for the whole thing, because I'd been ripped off and his work had been photocopied. So his brother Thomas Anson, when he died, changed the whole estate because he wanted a specific look and he had to use his brother's money to make it. This poem is called When Your Brother Died. You spent his fortune on your dreams, built your grand estate on the back of his stolen wealth like it was yours, like it was his. He would have loved it. Grecian taste, oriental magnificence, how to dress opportunistic betrayal so that it may strut. How graceful can greed be? Who taught you to take so well? Which marauder unlocked your potential to unlock, relock, annex, asseverate, own? Did he know? Had he seen boomerangs before? When he threw you, could he foresee your future as vulture, his future as carrion? How proud he would be. Cool. So that's enough about the Ansons. We'll get rid of them. One of the things that I noticed that almost every National Trust house that I visited was the library. The libraries are magnificent. There's something special. You can see down in the corner there, the please do not touch sign in the library. And there are books in National Trust libraries that are available nowhere else in the world, and you're not allowed to touch them, which kind of epitomizes, I'm using the word epitomizes a lot, kind of highlights the issue that we have. And this next poem that I wrote called Library came from different notes around the libraries. One of them is on the screen now, and how they spoke about what the library was. And for me, the library and the knowledge that it contained became a platform to keep these people above everybody else because they had the information that nobody else had. Library. This room is book lovers, is a testament, is two generations. This room is additional shelf space. This room where children read politics by the fireplace, these politics that place children by fires. This room, coated now in dust or ash, we discover how weeds became flowers, how light became controlled. This room is a doorway, this room is a boundary, this room is a foundation, this room has no ceiling. And one of the things that I think we've seen it a lot in the news recently. I started writing this project maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We've seen a lot in the news recently around people being unaware of empire and people not knowing what happened in the empire and what our history is and even what our present is in some cases. And I went to a National Trust house and they had the ceiling art that looks like it's moving when you walk past it. And I read that this is called trompe-l'oeil. And this is a French word and it's about the art of illusion. It's the literal meaning is trick the eye. And this like stuck with me because in many ways, the way this stuff is presented represents the art of illusion. And there's a picture at Charlotte of, I can't remember the man's name, Mr. Lucas, James Lucas maybe. And you might not be able to see it on this screen, but there is a black boy holding the horse. And the black boy has got a metal collar around his neck. And there was uproar because in the documentation at the house, the black boy was described as a page boy. And I think we all know what the black boy actually was. And this poem is called Trompe-l'oeil. The black boy with the metal collar is a page boy, chained like the horse he holds. A black beauty, a beast braced by the man he serves. Out of frame, there is champagne pissing from the heavens, intoxicating. The statue lions have been roaring into the vacuum, animated in protestation. And here, in this corridor between actuality and invention, the black boy in the collar is a page boy. Cool. So, on my journey to writing this book, things changed for me. So at first I was researching, I was reading about the Anson's history, I was reading about some of the atrocities of colonialism, how viceroys worked, how things were taken and never put back. And actually, sorry, I'll go back a slide. How things were taken. This image on the right-hand side is an Afro comb taken from Somalia. And they believe that the comb was carved from one piece of wood. And the person who took the comb was most likely someone whose hair was so straight naturally that they never needed that comb. And it always stuck with me that you imagine on the day you wake up, women have been raped, men have been murdered, all of your things have been taken by this external force. And there's something that kind of jarred in my head, like I couldn't even comb my hair because they even took the combs. And that bogged me in a way that probably something that seems so insignificant shouldn't bog me. But I went from research and I went into interest and I went into enjoyment. I started to enjoy these spaces and I will talk about why in a second. But one of the things that I researched that I really wanted to see was the Old Man of Cork, which is a tree that you can see next to you. And it's one of the oldest trees in the country. And I wrote this poem, and normally I don't talk about what this poem's about, and people never know what it's about, but the poem was inspired by the Old Man of Cork, and it's called The Old Man. The old man has seen things that we haven't. His scruffy coat doesn't do his grandeur justice. Old and nobbled, I'd imagine that he hobbled here, weighed down and wearied by the knowledge that so many who were born beneath him are now gone. Those who provided shade at his birth are barely even memories. He is not the last man standing. But what is company when your past is the longest and your future the strongest? How do you sit at lunchtime when you've eaten the ancestors of your peers and written recipes for their unborn children? He is not old like your bedbound nana. He is old like royal palaces, surrounded by tower blocks who have youth but little more. There is no point in learning his story to share his legacy. When you are gone, he will tell it for himself. You will not feature. The old man has seen things that we haven't. He will see things that we will not. Cool. So as I say, I went from research, some of the poems you've already heard, to interest, poems like The Old Man of Cork. And then I went into enjoyment, and there was a very specific reason for my enjoyment. I was taking my son, Xander, the young superstar that you can see there, to National Trust houses. I was taking him onto greenery that I would never have been on at his age. I was taking him to see things that I would never have seen at his age. and his excitement and his enthusiasm and his passion was infectious. And I became able to enjoy these spaces for what they are right now, as well as consider them for what they represent. And one day we were at National Trust, and Xander had some soup, and this poem came from that. It's called Soup. Today you ate soup like it was your first meal that you had eaten in days. You had half a cheese sandwich for lunch at 1:30. There is soup on the table and bread in your hair. You look like Mowgli from the Jungle Book if Mowgli had eaten soup. And you smile as the yogurt is placed in front of you. You look at yogurt how I looked at your mother the day I met her. How I looked at your mother at 4 o'clock this morning as she sighed in her sleep, dreaming of you and your ways. You look at yogurt how I looked at your mother when I found her in the art room at college, painting. Her paintbrush darting like sparrows on autumn mornings, leaving crimsons and caramels in their wake. I knew then that she would spend her life both being and making beauty. She feeds you yogurt. I take the wipes out. There is soup all over the floor. So, what does it mean to write these poems? And this was a point in me putting together these poems where I thought I was finished. And I sent them to a few people, one of them being my dad, who is not a poet, but is a wise man. And people said to me, what does it mean? We get that this has happened, but what does it mean? And I realized that what I hadn't touched on is what the day-to-day experience is of people whose lives have been infected by what has happened. And so I started writing about how I grew up, where I grew up, and what that looks like. And I wrote these two poems. The first poem is called Every Boy Who Dies in the Ghetto Is Me. And I wrote this poem after a boy who I was mentoring kind of broke down and cried after another young boy in the area died, and asked him if he knew him. And he said no, but it could have been me. His parents could be my parents. And this poem is called Every Boy Who Dies in the Ghetto Is Me. Maybe I was too young. They say your life flashes before your eyes. Maybe I haven't seen enough life. The only light I saw came with a bang attached. The only thing I saw was death, grinning like a schoolboy who takes money at lunchtime, snatching before speaking, without care. There wasn't rain on the day I fell. The street could not clean itself. A woman who looks like my mother had to clean the blood. She saw her son turn from smiles to spray, to stains, to suds, to silence. She saw her boy, barely born, buried before she saw him live. Cool. And after I wrote that poem, I realized that equally, all of the boys in the ghetto could be on the other side of that. And so I wrote this poem, Every Boy Who Kills in the Ghetto Is Me. I am no Richter scale. I know nothing of earthquakes, but I can explain how the hand shakes as the trigger squeeze reaches pause point. I could describe how both hands vibrate the morning after a boy drops in the wake of their treachery. I have killed myself and live to tell the story. Is it still suicide if the you that dies carries a different heart, answers to another name, grew on another block? When your dad says sorry to his in the courtroom, is it sorry your son died, or sorry mine didn't? And in the midst of writing these poems, I played around with form in many different ways. And one of them was I wrote this poem. It's called a concrete poem, which means the poem holds some kind of shape. The poem is all about time. The poem is written in the shape of an hourglass, and it's about someone that I lost. It's called Suspended. The light in the hospital toilet flickers. The fragile beat of a heart during surgery. We remind each other how strong you are, trying to siphon that strength to restrain the furious estuaries of our eyelids. I switch tactics from rapid blinking to calm, solid eye contact, knowing that showing my weakness would be accepting yours. I can't betray you. The word in the air stinks of blood, taste of death. They will tell us that you're gone. They never say dead. It doesn't change the fact. It will not change the light bulb in the light. It just flickers until it can't. We stand in darkness telling each other that you have traveled to the luminescence that you deserve. At your funeral, I'll hold my sister in my arms. Let the tsunami break my eyelids like you broke my faith. There's no strength in denial now. They'll tell me time will heal. I know now that we all run out of time. And very quickly, very, very quickly, I'm going to do 2 more poems. In the midst of writing this collection, I spoke to my dad a few times about different things. And one of them was about the way in Afro-Caribbean tradition and many other traditions, parents tend to hit their children. And we spoke about the historical context of that, where people were kept as slaves, and the way that they were disciplined was through beating, and it wasn't many generations ago. And my dad said, more than that, people hit their children because they're scared that their children will end up having to find out the consequences of their actions somewhere else. So they are harsh, very harsh on them in the house. And there's a saying that you may know, spare the rod, spoil the child. And this poem is called No Rod Spared. When you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, your son will inhale the oceans and release sorry on its waves. When the tide washes over you, you will hold for a moment. As his winds break, cheeks fall, and tension leaves his shoulder, you will strike with more potency. Blood will run from the fault lines across a forearm thrown in defense. He will look from behind the shield of the hate for the hatred that he knows must live in your eyes. His gaze will fall on fear and trepidation. You walk him to this depth, let his lung hold water only to keep him from drowning at the hands of another. Cool, so my last poem, something that I need to thank, there's a poet called Caleb Femi. If you don't know who Caleb Femi is, please take him in, I'll talk about him again in a second. Something that I took from Caleb Femi's collection, Poor, which is about growing up in Southeast London, in Peckham, which is about just life in a kind of ghetto environment. Something that I took from it, which was really important and started to shape some of the stuff I did in this collection, was there's joy in his collection, and there's joy in his collection because there's joy in the ends. There's joy growing up in inner city Birmingham. And the last poem I want to share and what I want to leave this on is this poem called Two Swings. And this poem is about love in the ends. And they will not hold hands. Instead, they will let little fingers hang, intertwined. In this bond, they will keep the time. He said, I don't know, man. You're special. And the time she said, yeah, maybe not all boys, just most. Between this finger link and his black Air Max 95s brushing along the side of her white Air Force Ones, they will hold a phenomenon that will break every rule of this place. They will wrap it warmly in black tracksuits, dip it in honey, coat it in Demerara sugar, and rock it back and forward on these swings under midnight sky. Cool. So the collection is called Please Do Not Touch. Caleb Femi, who I'm kind of wild that he said this about it because he's one of the best poets working right now, in my opinion, said this is a beautifully shattering collection, how delicately unstitches small and personal disasters on the page, how Casey flattens Birmingham and soaks our hands into its soil so we can feel its warmth, its grit, and the seeds that may still germinate one day. Thank you, Caleb Femi. That is extremely generous. And that is me done reading you poems. So hopefully I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Cool.
Here we go. Thank you very much, Casey. That had me kind of a bit sort of spellbound and all over the place. I don't know at the moment if we've got any questions from the audience. There we go.
So, for this collection in particular, that was really hard. First of all, I chopped a lot of poems from the collection that I'd originally wanted to publish, so it's quite a lot longer than it currently is. So that was the first kind of thing. And then I wanted it to work in sections, kind of sections around the kind of history, select sections around the present. But when I spoke to the publisher was like, it feels like overly dense in the historical time. It feels like almost too depressing. And I have a reputation of being the happiest poet with the most depressing poems. But the publisher was like, oh, still a bit. So with this one, I wanted there to be like I specifically went for like a chop and change of energies. And so I just kind of pieced them together and read them. I read the whole collection out loud loads of times, videoed it to myself, moving poems around to see how they felt like they traveled. And when I felt like I got the right order, it stuck. Good question. That was tough.
Cool.
So there's a saying definitely about collections, not so much about poems, but I'll come back to the poems, that people have said to me loads about poetry collections is it's never finished. You just stop working on it. Like you accept it's at the level that it's going to be at. And I think with poetry,
music, like that kind of music thing where a track is only finished when you say, I'm not going to work on it anymore.
Exactly, yeah. And you could always add another instrument. You could always put a little bit more backing vocals in. You could always strip something back. And I think, most good poems that I've read and good poems that I've heard, the person's probably edited it 5 times, and I would have thought every one of those edits was great. And so you get the finished one, and they probably think, oh, I could have edited that again. So it is impossible to say when a poem is finished. All you can say is, I'm not doing anything with the poem anymore. That's what you can say. Yeah, so that is the plan. I think that there's a real kind of balance for me personally. I can't speak for anyone else. There's a real balance in poetry of having enough kind of abstract and metaphor and not too literal, while still keeping it attached to the point. And that's the idea. Yeah. So I want people to feel like they can see what's unfolding, and it's easier when it's spoken. It's even harder again when you do it on the page. But that's the plan. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And if I read it and I don't think it makes sense, like to somebody other than me, that's what I'll go back and kind of look at. I wouldn't say my direct research of the empire has fed back into my work. My understanding of racism in our society has definitely fed into how I engage with everything in my life, absolutely everything, and that includes how I work with young people and how I work with teachers, how I work with staff. So yeah, I'd say my overall holistic understanding of racism and its roots has definitely impacted the way in which I work. That's a good question. So I know a lot of poets who kind of they have the kind of standpoint and the viewpoint that if people don't get it, it doesn't matter. And I think everyone will get slightly different things from poems. My personal opinion, there's a poet called Gil Scott-Heron. Gil Scott-Heron, absolutely legendary poet, who
the inventor of hip hop.
Right, and Gil Scott-Heron is the person who invented the phrase "the revolution will not be televised."
Yeah.
And Gil Scott-Heron said that there's a thing that we do as poets where we kind of feel like it's not a poem if there aren't certain things that people don't understand, and he doesn't get that. And so we try to be too deep in poems, and he said we don't need poets to make things more complex. To me, I would like if everybody understands a poem, but at the same time, I'm not going to write it in such a way that there is therefore no poetics in it. So I'm kind of going for that balance of there's enough poetic kind of expression without it being like so abstract that you actually don't know what the thing's about. So yeah, that's really important balance for me.
There you go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely will. It's to put it simply.
that was an easy one.
I will sign it for you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is a good question.
Do you find that feathers get ruffled when you write about sensitive historic? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason for that is, it goes back to one of the things I said. And there's 2 poems in the book. They're called Same Energy, and they look just like each other, and they sit on opposite pages, and they explore the way that we discuss criminals in the modern day, and we have heroes of the past who did the same thing. And I think that there's something difficult about knowing that how we live was built on negativity or built on criminality or things that weren't criminal at the time but probably should have been, in that we have to explore our own position. We have to look at, am I where I am because of certain things that happened in the past? And people don't want to look at themselves in that way, because we all want to think that I just did great and that's where I am. Unless people are struggling, then people will look back and say, well, this never happened.
I think it's interesting because Focke-Wulf really sort of touched on that earlier by with the white privilege duff coat. My consciousness is right now we're not to get sort of massively political, but we're now in a phase where we're talking about printing out more flags and making sure the British flag is present everywhere, which seems like a balmy kind of thing to be doing, but really ties in with with your poetry about empire.
There's a poem in the collection called Viceroy, and just very briefly, the Viceroy was like the person who British people sent to a country to rule that country on behalf of the king or queen. And we talk about like trade relationships with India have come up quite a lot in the midst of Brexit. But the way our trade relationship worked with India is we put a British person in charge and we bought all their stuff really cheaply off them because we were selling it to ourselves. And now in the present day, we go, we could have a fantastic trade relationship like we did with India before. The equivalent of our trade relationship with India is like me sending my brother to your house. He takes over your house and sells me your PS5 for £5. Like, it's not a brilliant trade relationship.
Funny enough, they're not so interested in 2021.
And I read that poem in India, and even in India, I did a reading in India in January 2020, and people are like, we never thought about that. Like we've just accepted that this is what happened, and this was great, and that was like mind blowing for me.
That's fascinating. Cool. And the last one. Oh yes.
There is a poetry event that should happen quarterly. That's run by a guy called Casey Bailey, called Ramblers Ball. That is not the best poetry night in Birmingham, though. There is Hit the Ode. Sturchley Speaks, if you're in Sturchley Way. Hit the Ode is central Birmingham, based at the Hippodrome now, run by Apples and Snakes. There's Sturchley Speaks, which is, I don't know what the cafe is called now. I think it's called Abstract in Sturchley. There is Poetry Jam, run by Beat Freaks. There's loads and loads and loads. Reach out to someone at Apples and Snakes. They won't thank me for saying that because they'll get bombarded, and they kind of know what's happening and what's going
on. Cool. Yeah. Specifically, Beat Freaks are on the sort of the radar of Brum Tapas. So we've got a couple of recommendations by their CEO of young people that want to speak. I'm not sure what content it is, whether it's poetry or not, but it might well be. But they're people that we're really interested in kind of hosting and pushing the work that they do. So thank you for the final speaker of the evening. Thanks, Casey. That was absolutely awesome.